This is the Storyworks Roundtable, where we have conversations about craft. Because becoming a successful author begins with writing a great story. Hey guys, the structure of story is now open. This is a Storyworks Fiction nuts and bolts course, and it's all about structure. Because often structure isn't taught. People assume it's just a natural byproduct of writing. Like, if you write a story, you'll intuitively know how long to make your scenes, where to place chapter breaks, and how to maximize the effects of dramatic or comedic action. But that really isn't true. Yes, literature is an art form, but like all other art forms, it springs from a definite working knowledge of craft. By learning the mechanics of story structure, you'll be able to identify the key elements of your story, shape them to increase your story's desired effect on your readers, and turn craft concepts into tools that you have at your disposal whenever you sit down to write. You can find out more about the structure of story and preview 2 of the modules, including 3.2, which is all about chapters, at storyworksfiction.com. This course is open, it's live, it's ready to enroll. Head over to storyworksfiction.com, get the preview, and hopefully I'll see you in the classroom. All right, enjoy this week's show. Welcome to this week's Storyworks Roundtable. We are thrilled to have Micah Joel here as part of our genre series. We're talking lit RPG tonight. Micah is a fan of vintage computing and all things 8-bit, the coordinator of game room programming for FogCon, a Bay Area sci-fi fantasy convention in the style of WisCon. He graduated from Viable Paradise during John Scalzi's final year teaching the workshop. Micah is a nationally recognized beer judge and ham radio operator. His debut novel, Broken Tablet, came out in 2016, and his 8-bit novel, Level Up, is coming out this spring. Welcome, Micah. Thanks for coming to the Roundtable.
Yeah, thanks, Alita. It's good to be here.
Yeah, so lit RPG, is this a new genre on the scene? How long has this been around? And why don't you define what lit RPG is? People might not know.
So the short answer is lit RPG. I guess some people might refer to it as game lit. Mm-hmm. Maybe it rolls off the tongue a little better. It's basically defined as a story where explicit game mechanics are integral to the story. So like people leveling up, now you're level 6 at this skill, right? Or heart meters or things like that.
Okay.
It's been around for a number of years. It seems like it started more in Russia. It was very popular in Russia for a number of years. But it is catching on more in the United States now and in the West. We've even seen movies starting to come out in the genre.
Okay. Now, when you say like leveling up in the game, the kind of gamification, is that only of the story and the characters, or do readers kind of participate in this as well? Is there sort of a gamification for the readers as they work through the story?
Yeah, it seems like it's definitely connected with interactive fiction and some of these pieces. I haven't seen a lot of people explicitly doing that, but yeah, that would be very interesting.
Yeah. Do you have any specific examples for those who are not familiar with the genre or category of sort of classic novels that you'd say, look, this is clearly lit RPG? Because I've heard debate about it, and and there are some things that the hardcore lit RPG readers expect, but others of us who just write, say, sci-fi might miss.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the one most people have probably heard of is Ready Player One.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. So that and yeah, like Robert said, there's some debate among the purists if that really counts as explicit game mechanics, because the characters are playing games, but they're not really ruled by the mechanics of a game world.
Yep.
So yeah, if you search on Amazon for words like game lit, you'll find a whole bunch of very prolific writers that are putting out a novel a month in series. And you'll find a lot of themes around things like Dungeons and Dragons type stories.
Yep.
There's a sub-genre where the dungeon itself is a character. So
wow. I've learned something new today.
Yeah.
So interesting, because I would have thought, like, I've read Ready Player One and I've read a couple of other short stories that were kind of fantasy-esque that had, like, the game within the story that you're using as kind of an architecture within the story. So is that not then what you're talking about in terms of game rules? Because that's immediately where my brain went, where the characters are participating in a separate game. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I'm thinking of like Hunger Games. They're in a game, right? But Lit RPG is definitely of a geekier strain than that. So a lot of and I also see kind of a connection to some 80s nostalgia.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
So like I don't know, Stranger Things, right? They do a lot of pencil and paper gaming in that series.
Mm-hmm.
So it seems like there are at least common threads among that. A lot of the game rules that people are nostalgic about are like think of Space Invaders and Pac-Man and some of the early Zelda games, right? So I remember coming home from school and flipping on my NES and sitting down and playing through Zelda with my brother and sister.
Mm-hmm.
So,
right.
So then would the story be like a story world happening within Zelda kind of an idea, rather than the story of you being interactive with Zelda? I mean, you know what I mean? Right. Like, it's not a character third party to the game. It's actually a character within the game itself.
Yeah, a lot of stories where somehow someone gets pulled into the computer. Tron.
Okay.
Even the Jumanji movie.
That's what I understood, is that it's the kind of switch around. Is the story the game, or is the game just part of the story? And as I understand it, with the purists, really want the story to be the game.
Right.
And so with Ready Player One, the debate is, well, it's really a thriller where the game is just the MacGuffin. But because it's so intense and it's got so much, brilliantly executed 80s nostalgia in there, it kind of does suck you in, which is nice. Right. But in true terms, it's debatable, I think, from the purists. But most of us would read it and say, "Oh, that's an RPG."
Right.
Yeah. I love virtual reality. Yeah.
Let's do a little clarification discussion here, because when I hear lit RPG, I do think of something like Tron, where the story takes place within and as part of the game, and so our protagonist and antagonist are within that world. But then you mentioned like Dungeons and Dragons, so is that kind of a subcategory of lit RPG where it's the role-playing game, but not a computer game or not a video game? Or is it a totally different thing?
Yeah, there are electronic versions of all these different role-playing games.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where everything converges. Whereas, the computer games where it keeps track of your life and your skill levels at various things and your inventory. Right? Even going back to like late 70s, some of these text adventures. I don't know if you guys have ever played.
Yeah, I remember those.
Colossal Caverns, or that adventure game from the Atari 2600 with the funny-looking dragons.
Mm-hmm. So, what are the genre conventions of game lit or lit RPG? What are readers looking for, and what would you say as a writer you need to kind of abide by or be aware of? So
the main thing is, if you call it lit RPG, you need to adhere to the rules, and you need to have explicit game mechanics integral to the story. So if you violate that, people who don't know what lit RPG is will just be confused, and people who don't know what it is will kind of not want to
get out the torches and chase you down. Interesting. So what are some game mechanics that that you can give us as examples, either that you've read or written into your own fiction?
Okay, so the story I'm working on involves, so in the future, in the late 2020s, all the computers worldwide just stop working one day, which causes all kinds of chaos and post-apocalyptic things happening. Mm-hmm. About a decade after that, our protagonist is living in a camp, and he starts seeing little blips of video game appearing in his line of sight. Mm-hmm. And these gradually get stronger and stronger and kind of take over his world until he plays through the level to see what's at the end of it. So there's an explicit game mechanic of collecting items, like in Zork, the famous trophy case where you put all your each you collect a prize and you bring them all back to the trophy case. And so he has to play through this. There's a competitive aspect because other people are trying to collect items. Mm-hmm. The farther he gets into it, the more and more game mechanics pick up. So then he gets a heart meter, and every time he takes damage, he loses hearts. And if he gets down to 0, he will have to respawn somewhere and lose all of his inventory items. So it's a lot of times the challenge in lit RPG is making the case for why the game mechanics actually are there. And so of competitions, right? Like the big corporation is running a competition, and whoever wins it gets, healthcare or
prestige,
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Huh.
And from the point of view of exposition, what sort of challenges does that then bring when you're trying to continue the sort of continuous information, I guess, that the story is going to advance. So in my mind, I'm thinking the story will advance so far, and then the gamer is going to want to know, okay, but where's the game board at, and what's my inventory, and how do you deal with that in as a story writer, as a narrator?
Yeah, that's one of the interesting challenges too. Some lit RPG stories actually have character sheets in them.
Right.
So the major character, here's the character sheet, and here's their attributes like strength and dexterity and skills and things like that. So there's some debate about whether that's a good thing or not as far as storytelling goes.
Yeah. It's an unusual thing.
Well, what do you think, or what do all of you think, as both readers and writers, is something like a character sheet cheating? Is it being lazy as a writer? Is it really fun as a reader? Or what do you need to do to make it, not a crutch, but something actually cool?
I think that there's a lot of fantasy novels that use the similar thing with the glossary in the back. So I don't think it's that abnormal. And I think that readers who want it will read it, and readers who don't care will not. Because like the majority of the time, if there's like sometimes the fantasy novels will put it at the beginning, like this is your list of characters, and this is the list of magic items, and this, and this is the all that. I'll just skip it because I don't care. I want to discover it through the exposition. But I'm sure there are some readers who just desperately want that at the beginning, to be able to see and understand that. So probably a similar thing with readers of the genre.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it probably comes down to chunk size. How much am I prepared to digest of informative text? And probably I've got less tolerance than maybe a hardcore gamer that is curious to know all the micro ins and outs. But to me, it seems like it's just part of setting in a way. So, you treat it the same way. You try and drip feed it in or deliver it just in time.
Right.
So something flashes up on the screen. Oh, holy crap! I've lost. I've lost 3 swords. Where did that come from? And that might be enough to satisfy me. But as I say, I'd be curious to know with Micah, with some of the real hardcore readers, would really expect to have tables and sheets and such driving the narrative.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say. It depends on what kind of audience you're targeting with your book. So there is a substantial set of people out there who are reading a book a week, and they like their character sheets. They like, the geekier the better.
Yeah, right.
A more mainstream audience might not understand what's going on with the character sheet.
Right. So it's almost part of the game. It's part of what makes it RPG is having those things.
Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm. So that could be fun then to write as well, if you get creative with it. And
yeah. What are the things that you're recording on that character sheet? You can become innovative in your own way.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I suppose as well that becomes more second nature to someone who spends many hours every day gaming, whereas another author trying to come in to that world and say, "Oh, I hear lit RPG is quite hot. I'll write it." Might miss some really important elements of the craft because it is so so niche or niche.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'll speak American.
Yeah. So how much of a background do you think a writer needs to have in gaming before you attempt to write this kind of book? Is that kind of a critical background to understanding the genre and the reader expectations?
I think so. A lot of the reviews I've heard for lit RPG stories have been along the lines of, this seems like it was a different story, and they tried to slather some lit RPG on it just to catch the
Right.
So those reviews don't go well for those books. So
yeah,
I think think of like Brandon Sanderson's magic systems in his books. They're very well put together. Everything makes sense. It's consistent through and through. So actually planning out game mechanics is a skill.
Yes.
And especially making a good one that can sustain a narrative for novel length.
Right.
So that's something. I suppose there's people out there who can just intuitively do that, but I think if you've played through games, if you've beat Zelda and if you've beat different video games, I think that would help you a lot. Intuitively understand what kind of game mechanics you need.
Right. So how does that factor into plotting out a novel? Like when you sit down to write and you're just starting to outline or storyboard a new book and you need all of these game mechanics, kind of what's your starting point, or how do you consider structure differently than a different kind of novel?
Yeah, I think for me, it's very much like plotting out a fantasy novel where you have either magic or high tech or virtual reality, some set of fantastical things that are beyond our everyday experience. You have to explain them in a way that's not an info dump. You have to introduce the reader to how this world works. Right. So a lot, those are all core storytelling components. And the challenge in lit RPG is fitting those into the gaming world.
Yeah, well, it sounds as if the rules might be also a little tighter or more explicitly taken apart by, because gamers have a habit of trying to game things,
right?
And so you might sit back with a Brandon Sanderson novel and say, okay, I don't really understand how the magic of that particular telepath or that particular sword works, but I'll put up with it. Whereas somebody's going to see your game set of rules and think, no, that wouldn't work like that. That's just stupid. So I suppose that real attention to detail as well is key when you're doing the world building.
Yeah,
and consistency. It sounds like the lit RPG fans might be like the hardcore science fiction fans in their willingness and desire to pick things apart and really understand the structure and the rules, and eagerness to call you on it if you make a mistake.
So then how do you create then something as a really compelling story? So because there would be, again, I'm thinking like hard sci-fi, where the temptation is to over-explain all the science, and then typically a lot of readers will then say, I just went, it went over the top. Right. So you still got to construct a story out of that. What is it that typically draws in the lit RPG reader once they've accepted the game world? What sort of things do they look for? Are they looking more for for thrillers or action, or does love story ever appear in an RPG? And it's interesting.
Yeah, there is a widening set of variants on this. Yeah, I've run across reviews for love stories and even like erotic type lit RPGs. I've read that myself. But I think so. Let me put this thought together here. So, in some sense, lit RPG is more restricted than general science fiction or fantasy, right? Mm-hmm. But with constraints come additional creativity. So, as I think a lot of writers have run into that, if you set up a bunch of constraints around a problem or around a story, it forces your brain into a different place, right? Mm-hmm. And you sometimes really amazing things can come out of that.
Interesting. Yeah, I like that. With constraint comes great creativity. Yeah. So would you say lit RPG is just another setting, another world people like to inhabit? Like we've talked on the show about science fiction and space operas and how really they're like Westerns, only they're happening in space. So is lit RPG just kind of another world box where you can fit in whatever type of character, interaction and motivation you want to?
I think that might be what's happening. Mm-hmm. So there's been some discussion about whether that we could become its own category on Amazon. Mm-hmm. I kind of think of it as kind of like, I don't know, cozy mysteries are a subgenre with a very specific set of rules and expectations that come into it. Mm-hmm. So within the space of cozy mysteries, there can be a lot of different things that can happen. So it's I don't know, maybe we need a new word for that other than subgenre.
Right.
Well, that does make sense. I mean, there's such a wide variety of people who play, there's so many different genres of games within, that if you can take any sort of game rule set and put a story over the top of it, then you're going to end up with, eventually, as people start understanding what this genre is and start getting more into it, you will have a wider variety of people wanting a wider variety of stories.
Right.
Because we've already seen that with video games. Not all Zelda or Dungeons and Dragons,
Yep. And the 800-pound gorilla, I think, here is the Ready Player One movie from Steven Spielberg, coming out in May or March. So we'll see how that goes. It looks like they've deviated from the book somewhat, as you would expect, to adapt it to the movie screen. But it will be very interesting to see how the that goes over in the wider general public.
Right. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see if there's an explosion of indie fiction in that category trying to ride that wave as well. We've seen happen before.
No, that's just something. They don't go in and spoil it for all the people who know how to write it. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Yes. Well said, Robert.
I think already in the midst of an 80s wave.
Yeah.
Yeah. Very true. All right. Well, any final thoughts or questions for Micah here as we wrap up this episode?
Well, I've got one. It's an easy one. Where do you hang out? Where do these RPG people hang out? Are there sort of forums that because you say this is getting discussed. Purists are. Where is that? If somebody wanted to learn more about it.
Yeah, my main source is the Lit RPG podcast.
Okay.
Run by Ramon Mejia. So he's one of those guys. He reads probably 7 to 10 books a week and reviews them on the podcast.
Okay.
So that's a really good resource to just tune into what's going on in the lit RPG world.
Yeah, I'm going to listen to that.
Nice. Cool. Well, we will definitely link to that as well as to Micah's website and all kinds of cool stuff in the show notes, as always.
Yep.
So
looking forward to reading your book when it comes out, Micah, as well.
Okay.
Yeah, I love the premise. That's excellent.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, let me point people at 8bitnovel.com.
Okay, fantastic.
So there's some mysterious things going on that website. So you might want to check it out.
He's gamifying us already.
we're getting sucked into that world right away. All right, so 8bitnovel.com. Thank you so much, Micah, and we'll have you back for a companion episode. Thank you for listening to the Storyworks Roundtable. Find all our shows, show notes, and videos at storyworkspodcast.com.